we have Nate sharing with us this morning. I mean, you've seen these things before, I think.
Yeah.
It's gonna be a little different because, you know, you and I are about the only two ex-service members there are, so there's a little difference. So my first question is, are military officers completely worthless or just worthless?
You can't spell lost without LT.
Okay.
Right, so, you know. But we also used to say, well, you can't spell wimp without MP. So little running cadences. No, they're good. They're good. You just gotta, you know, the platoon sergeant's gotta break them in a little bit. That's all.
Yes.
I will say there's one time, so we always did, I don't know if you ever did this, we had hazing. Initiation for the new officers. So the second lieutenant would show up from either West Point or ROTC or wherever they're coming from. And then, you know, there's 40 guys in a platoon. We were never fully staffed up, but we'd have about 30 guys in a platoon. They need us a lot more than we need them, if that makes sense.
Right.
Now they're in charge, but they need to be made to understand that there's 30 of us, there's one of you, right? And so you need to treat us well and we will treat you well. And so the first general thing is a display of power by the platoon. And so, you know, end of day formation, this is your new lieutenant. He's in charge of you guys. The captain, the first sergeant, you know, the company is out there. First platoon, third platoon, captain, and the first sergeant, they dismiss. Well, our platoon's still there, you know. Platoon sergeant says we need to, sorry.
No, we're not doing it.
No. They wanted to use, David wanted to use it, didn't he?
No.
No, he didn't want
He only
to.
wanted to.
You used it, you didn't want him to use
For the far people.
Well, I'll just let it sit there and think about using it.
See, you got too many sergeants.
Yeah. Too many cooks, too many LTs. So they dismissed, and there's actually two examples of this. One was we got a new guy in, or a new lieutenant in, and we had these double-decker dumpsters behind our barracks. And usually it was like, oh, just throw him in the dumpster, ha 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 ha. Well, we threw this guy in, and then we didn't hear the soft landing until a little bit later when he hit the bottom of the day, just cleaned the dumpsters out. So we didn't mean to do that. So we climbed in and fished him out, you know. Wouldn't be the first time I'd dumpster dived in the Army, but
The lieutenant.
yeah. And he was a good sport about it. He was a real good sport about it. Lieutenant Brown, I think was his name, if I remember right. But they're good people. They're all right. Yeah, they just gotta get broken in a little bit. What?
That drop would help break it.
Yeah. We didn't want to break them in that much.
See, in the Air Force, we were much more formal. That would never have happened.
Yeah.
And, we,
Are you sure?
well, yeah, I commanded 250 troops and they wouldn't dare touch me, you know.
You didn't get thrown in a dumpster?
Oh, heck no.
Now, see, we wouldn't have jumped a captain. We would never have jumped captain, but they'd already been through it as an LT.
Right.
Although there was one time we got a retread captain. So he had been enlisted prior.
Oh, that's the
And
word.
then he became, well,
They understand you a little bit more.
Yeah, half
but
a
that
dozen
is-
one way, six the other.
Exactly.
Yeah. And what was it? We got a new guy in. So our CO was ex-enlisted. And we got a new lieutenant in, that was ROTC. And captain went up to the end of day briefing. So we broke into his office, duct taped this lieutenant down to his desk.
Right.
Lock the door behind us, walk out, you know, thinking, captain will find him in an hour or two, you know. Well, it comes down the pipeline that the captain really hates this sort of stuff. So we go back into the captain's office. Well, we lock the door. We don't have keys to the captain's office, you know, rightfully so. So then we had to get the smallest private we could find to go crawl up through the ceiling to go down to unlock the door so we could go back in to cut him loose. Wow. And then we swore him to secrecy and he promised not to tell. Now I've spilled the beans. But I think I think the statute of limitations.
Yeah, I think
That'd
it's
have been-
on that.
That'd have been a while back.
Oh, just now.
Now, are you guard or reserve or are you completely out?
I did a year and a half in the Army Reserve and I did not care for I mean, maybe it was the unit I was in, but it was just a very different world from being, you know, 101st Airborne Division infantry to National or
Oh,
Army
okay.
Reserve. It was a very dramatic change.
Yeah, I went and inspected a guard unit one time and I was just horrified.
Yeah.
How bad it was.
Well, it's interesting, the disparity, because like my
Yeah.
buddy, so out of my class, let's see, Mac Thompson joined the Marine Corps. I went active duty, Eric Finderland went active duty, Dusty Houghton went National Guard, Seth Black went Air Force. Like we had a bunch of us that joined the military out of our class. And Dusty, talking to him, he was National Guard with the Red Bull Division out of Camp Dodge. And talking to him about their SOPs and how they operated and stuff like that, they seemed pretty squared away. But then when we replaced like a California National Guard unit, my first deployment, they had not done a thing. Like they just let their area of operation just deteriorate down to nothing. So we had a lot of work we had to do. And even he replaced or they were replaced by a National Guard unit out of Texas that was rolling out of like when they were doing the right seat ride, left seat rides, and they had finally kind of taken over. Like they're leaving the base without the barrels on their M2s, which is just like zero training. So, I mean, there's just a wide disparity, it seems like.
Can we chime in with a question?
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, did you have your hand up?
Right side, what?
Oh, so when you go into country, so generally the way it works, or at least in my experience, the way it worked is you get to Kuwait. Like I only deployed to Iraq, I never went to Afghanistan, but we would deploy, when we deployed to Iraq, you get in Kuwait and there you're acclimating to the temperature, right? Because it's a relatively decent change. And then you're also getting whatever end issue stuff like, oh, you need the special equipment, you need to do these certain things before you get in the country. And then what they do is about a weekend, they send leadership up. So like my second deployment, I was a squad leader. So me and the other squad leaders and platoon sergeant, lieutenant, we get sent up to go do, to learn about the area where we're going to be operating, to talk to the guys that are already boots on ground and kind of ride with them to get a feel for it. And so that's when we're in the right seat. So we're not in charge of the vehicle, right? And then when we go left seat, that's when we start driving, we're the gunners, like as more of the soldiers come up. So we're taking over equipment, we're learning the area, studying the maps and all that stuff. Because like for us, at least at my level, we didn't know exactly where we were going until we got into Kuwait because, you know, operational security. And then coupled with that, or so then you can't study maps or really know the area until you get in the area. So that was the left seat ride, right seat ride.
So Nathan, I'm curious, you mentioned all of those Lamoni grads from your class, including my stepson.
Yep.
I'm curious as to, were there conversations with you and your classmates about the decision to join the military? Did you have conversations with your mom and dad, your classmates, teachers? How did you arrive at thinking this is the right choice for me?
So for me, I'd always wanted to serve. So my great grandfather was in World War I. Mom's dad was in Korea. My dad's dad wanted to volunteer for Korea, but he had polio as a kid. Dad was in the Army. 2 uncles and an aunt were in the Navy. My other uncle on mom's side was in the Army. Like we have a long tradition of military service. And so I want to do that as well. Plus, you know, at 18 years old, some people are very ready for college or, you know, whatever the next step is. I would not have been that person. So I definitely needed that I wound up doing 6 years, but that 4-year stop to kind of get your head on straight, mature a little bit. So that way, like, so when I went to college, it was not an overly difficult process. Granted, I was in soft sciences. If I had been on Dr. Magley's side of campus, you know, or the engineering side of campus, it'd have been a lot more difficult. But as far as like keeping up with reading and stuff like that was not overly hard, but I was also 24 as opposed to 18. In discussing with my friends and stuff, like Eric, Dusty, and we all talked about it because we went to the military entrance processing station, MEPS, at about the same time. And so we were all talking with recruiters at the same time. Like Dusty tried to get us to go National Guard. Thought about that for a while, but then when you transfer over to active duty, you have to wait 6 months and then it's a reduction in rank. And so I didn't want to do that. And I got Eric to join regular Army instead of National Guard. And that actually helped me get a promotion because when he was going to join anyway, but it was one of those things where it's like, hey, just sign your name here and I'll get a bump up because I'm enlisting before you.
Thank you.
Oh,
Yeah, your great grandfather is famously has letters in the Lamoni Chronicle that he wrote back. So my question to you is, did you write letters to your mom and dad? Were you a prolific writer? Did you get a lot of letters?
I did get a lot of letters. Mostly what I got was care packages, which was just one of the most fan. I mean, like, if you can go back to being 6 years old on Christmas morning and being able to open those presents, that's mail delivery in Iraq, right? That's your lifeline to anything. And so, I got a lot of packages. I got a lot of packages from people that I never expected to get packages from. There was a lot of support from back home and then from abroad. Like our battalion was sponsored by Ashland, Tennessee, which if you've ever heard of Taylor Swift, that's where she grew up. Yeah. Right. And
Name sounds familiar.
Taylor Swift care package?
no, oddly enough, not. But I did see her in concert, which kind of blows my students' minds away. I said, I've seen Taylor Swift in concert. Really? Yeah, she was about 16 and opening for George Strait at Fort Campbell. Nobody had ever heard of her. And I get to George Strait. Little did I know. Yeah. But care bags were a big one. I didn't write a lot, and I should have. I mean, looking back on it, but I was also 20 at the time, and so 20, 21, then 22, and 23 at the next time. And so I did not write all that much. I didn't have a whole lot of time, and the time I did have was like, I just want to relax. So
Care packages are usually, where you can put stuff in an envelope and it doesn't matter how much it weighs, the box thing, the post office thing. And hundreds of these are shipped from the US to servicemen.
Sure.
I used to use, it was candy and all kinds of stuff. And what I do is I just pocket all the stuff and then give it to the guards and everybody that I came in, we couldn't even begin to eat that much candy. And, I figured it might help the guards shoot a little longer before they ran. So,
Question for Nathan. So Nathan, have you thought about writing up just for your own memory or to keep to pass down to your kid about your experience? Or is that too difficult for you or?
I don't think it'd be too difficult. The difficulty would be in remembering it exactly, right? So generally, it's not like it's something that just sits in my memory. If something happens and I'm like, oh, that reminds me of, just like anybody else, it's memory recall. And so like to sit down and write it now, what are we? 16 years removed from when I got out of the Army. So I don't know, it wouldn't be super fresh in my memory. And probably the things that I would remember would be things that I'm like, that's not something I want to tell, it's either something really bad that happened or something that's like, it's memorable because it's stupid and inappropriate. If that makes sense, as many Army things are. So.
I just want to say, I was in Kuwait as well, during the fires. And so I wasn't there military. I was there trying to, clean things up. And, a lot of Graceland people also were on that side. Mike Patterson, went in as a CO. He was a medic, but they ordered him to report for training with bayonet, and he said, that's not part of my my thing. And the military court decided it was illegal to disobey an illegal order. So he ended up at Leavenworth for a period of time.
I think I just used the bayonet.
And
you guys get to a bayonet, you've already lost.
It's, I've also had a chance to talk with Chelsea Manning, and Leavenworth was not a place you want to spend.
Yeah, that's why it's a prison. The place you wanted to go would be a prison.
But this next conference, we're going to be, as a church, voting on some peace issues. And I think it's hard for us to understand the kind of experience that you've had unless we were also there. And I'd like us to give some thought to the proposals that are there and see if we can come to some kind of a response that honors what everybody's done, because I think we should. What these people have done has just been amazing. And I've had a chance to experience some of that. I also speak this gentleman's language from 2 years in Iran.
Mm.
So I've been back since the revolution. So I've seen some things.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, Diane?
I was just gonna say, can you share a little bit about, your upbringing from your own spiritual development and how that has kind of carried you through the things that you've done in your life?
Well, so, grew up Moral Dios, of course, started out down at, Pleasanton, or not Pleasanton, Andover, sorry. I always flip the two. And then started going to Bloomington, and went to Bloomington essentially my whole life. And it was just a thing you didn't question. And when I say that, I don't mean like you shouldn't question your faith or you shouldn't grapple with it, stuff like that, right? But for me, it was never a problem. It's just, it is what it is, right? God is there. Jesus died for my sins. These are the doctrines. This is what I believe. And there was never a problem or a crisis of faith. I never had a crisis of faith, right? And I don't know if that's because I never got hit in the wrong spot, or whatever the case may be, or it's just like my conviction was sound enough that I didn't have to worry about that whatsoever. But my experience in the military, I remember, I should take a step back. My grandfather, dad's dad, when I graduated, said, "You're meant for something special." I said, "Yeah, whatever." And you say that to everybody. I heard you say that the other day to some man on the street. But he says, no, when I did, because he did my confirmation, he said, when I did your confirmation, I felt like you were meant for something special, like God told me. And in my mind, of course, as an 18-year-old, I'm sitting there thinking, oh, I'm going to be president someday. Yeah, ha, 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 or something, something to that effect. And I think when we think about something, when we think that we are going to be something special, that's where we put ourselves at, without realizing that being a father is pretty darn special. Being a teacher is pretty darn special. Being a priesthood member is pretty darn special. Helping your fellow man and being a good person is pretty darn special. And I feel like I've accomplished that, especially in the last, 4 years or so. 4 or 5 years, but you have to ask her for specifics. But when I was in the Army, like any bad thing that happened, and we went through a fair amount of strife. But anything that happened, I thought like, all right, we're on the plan. God's got my back. I'm good. I'll make it. I'll be fine. And like we're gonna go through some stuff, but we'll come out on the other side. And we'll be good for it. Not necessarily better for it, but we'll be all right. And I can't remember the verse off the top of my head, but it's I think I mentioned it once before in church. And it was that the Lord is my shield, of whom shall I be afraid, or something to that effect. And I can't remember the exact phrase, verbiage of it, but that always gave me comfort. So, and there's also on the flip side, if I did, what's the worst that's, if I did die in Iraq or something, what was the worst that's going to happen? I have good faith, I feel like I'm a good person. I've lived a good life. Death doesn't really frighten me too much because I'm not worried about going down. Right. And if I do, then I did something wrong. So there's where I go.
So what is your hope? What is your hope for your children?
That they live happy, successful lives in whatever they do. Right. So if we think about like education, one of the things I've seen in education is we're dealing with the effects of everyone should go to college. Every kid should go to college. And not every kid should go to college.
Correct.
Right? Some should go to trade school, some should go right to the workforce. Like, I'm not saying college is a bad thing or anything like that, because we're learning new things, learning how to think differently, like hearing different perspectives, right? Meeting all these people from all over, like Iowa State was 33,000 when I was there, right? I could meet anybody from any walk of life. And that's a wonderful thing, right? Graceland gives just such a breadth of diversity to our community where you can meet people from all over the place. That's a fantastic thing. I think that makes us much better rounded people, right? In a good way, not so much that way, But Oh, for the kids, yeah. But the telling every kid they need to go to college, go get $30,000 in debt for a degree that won't pay for itself. That's Iowa State, right? Iowa State's a state school. It's a cheap school, right? In comparison to other places. And so to go massively into debt for a degree you don't need or you're not going to use, that is silly, right? You are putting a bunch of people behind the 8 ball. And then you also look at your economy as far as like, are we going to have enough people in the trades? Are we going to have enough workers? Do these people have the qualifications or the attributes to get into college and not only get into college, but graduate college? So are we setting up a whole bunch of people for failure? And so I don't like that idea of everyone has to go to college. I think if you go to college and you're good, fantastic. If you go right to the workforce and you find stability and happiness, good. Trades, same thing. All I want for the kids is to find their calling and be happy in it. Right? Good people that can contribute to society.
What about family growing up? My siblings and.
I have 3 siblings, 3 sisters. Actually, this is the worst. And it's not that they did anything wrong to me, like Abby. So it's actually interesting. What is it? 3 family members tried to stab me at one point or another. Mainly due to my actions, right? One was my great grandmother was getting a bit doty. And this was the last activity we like family gathering we invited her to. I was about Daniel's age and probably a bit more rascally than Daniel. And she was running around with a knife after me. And we went, I probably shouldn't invite grandma anymore. Or at least keep a better eye on her. And so my sisters have that to look forward to. It seems to afflict the females of our family a lot more than males. But then Otis and Effie. Yeah. Which, as I understand it, she was the most wonderful person. Yes, I was, I hit her at the wrong spot. She was the wrong time in her life in that regard. And but from what I understand, her and Otis were just wonderful people. The other would be my sister Abby. I had mouthed off to her and she took a butcher's knife at me and said she was going to cut my tongue out. So I went and ran away really quickly, as a 6 or 7-year-old would do. She wouldn't have done it. She didn't have the guts. And then Melissa was the next one, my sister Melissa. So this was as an adult. I was living where I am now, but I would go over to my parents quite often. It's before Becky and I. So I'm over at my parents' house. My sister Melissa and I, we like to kind of play fight every once in a while. So I'll come over and I'm not gonna drag you out the window. Yeah, and she'll chase me around. It's good, silly fun. And so my parents, they have an island. So they're living room, kitchen, dining room, and they have an island that separates them. But you can go in a loop through the whole thing. And so my sister Melissa's chasing me, right? Well, this is a fool's errand because, I just keep running in front of her. So she stops at my sister Abby and goes, I go, all right, I know what's coming. So I go into the kitchen. Abby comes up behind me, grabs my arm. I'm like, oh no, she's got me. Well, there's a paring knife on the counter right there. I'll stand up a little to demonstrate. So Abby's got me. And Mom's sitting about where Diana is. And she can only see my face. Well, Abby says, all of a sudden you started struggling a lot. Because Melissa, she comes up, snatches that paring knife up and starts advancing upon me. And Abby goes, well, you really actually started struggling. Mom goes, your eyes went about like, you started backing up. So having sisters isn't too bad, I guess.
Can you share a little bit about like your, what it was that drew you to Becky? And
I just look at her. Look at her. Hello. Right now, well, not no to that. Sorry. Well, I gotta answer this one first. Well, so we grew up together, and I think one of our first conversations would have probably been upstairs in this building about whose dad could beat up whose dad. But ironically enough, there was a movie we watched the other night was about this very exact thing. It was like an Adam Sandler, very silly, not that great, but it was we wanted to watch it because of that same conversation. And we were both convinced that our dads would just win, right?
Great.
Yeah, first grade, sorry. So, but she was always a kind person. She was always nice. She always looked out for other. I remember in foods. So we dated for like a week or two in high school. As many high school relationships go, not well. We had gone to a dance together, I think, junior year. And so we had kind of skirted around each other a little bit, but never really synced up, which is like we've talked about that. Oh, what would have happened? We found each other when we were intended to find each other. We were both ready for each other. At least I am a very different person than I was when I was 18. And young, and of course younger. But Becky's always been kind and nice. And the story that really, I feel like exemplifies this is in Foods 2, sorry, with Mrs. Lysinger, which we took senior year because it's kind of, senior year. You don't want to take some hard classes. And so I was really hoping to be paired up with Becky, right? Because it's like, beautiful young lady, eligible. We've kind of talked to each other a little bit. And so we get into the cooking portion of it. Miss Lysinger goes, pair off. And so I start to move towards her, but there was another student in the class that was very high needs and developmentally delayed. And she clung like nobody else to Becky. And that was because Becky always treated her with the most kindness she could. She treated her, she saw her, she treated her well, she heard her, she talked to her. And so that was her Foods partner. And I always really admired that about her. She always takes the time to make time for people, whether she's feeling good about it or not. And she has a lot of love to give, and she spreads it, which is fantastic. And so that's one thing that's always really attracted me to her. Now, I got stuck with Tony Ballestad, who's a great guy, don't get me wrong, but definitely not what I was looking forward to.
It wasn't.
Yeah, it was not Becky. Pale Scandinavian imitation. Yeah, it's perfect.
What did your parents do when your sisters tried murdering you?
Murder's a strong word. Just a slight killing. No, I don't think we ever told anybody about Abby because you just don't rat on your sibling, right? Abby and I had a code. We didn't like each other until she turned about 18, and then we both kind of matured enough to be like, oh, you're not my enemy, right? But even though we didn't like each other, we didn't like getting in trouble, or we liked getting in trouble less than we liked, So we had a code where you don't rat on your sibling, and then it was usually us against anybody else. Right now, we would squabble with each other, but as soon as the attention is drawn against us, now we're bonding together. Right now, it's us against you. So, and then Melissa, we just laughed, and then great grandma, we just didn't invite her around much. So,
Did your parents ever find out about it?
oh yeah, we told them about it, but it's just joking. It's all right. Yeah.
I have a follow-up on that initial, my dad can beat up your dad.
Oh.
A follow-up, that somehow got in our house, and
Jim started training.
Jim said,
Hey, I said, your dad could take me. You don't need to escalate this. Becky didn't want to hear it, but I said, no, we're not.
No, we got a separate setting. No.
we knew there was no
He
contest.
wrestles with bulls, and I'm a computer scientist.
I don't know, the bull's gotten the better of him sometimes, so,
But I don't think that compares with.
A daughter
With
with
Jim.
faith in her father.
And rage against me, because I probably was not very kind about saying my dad could beat up. So.
Were your parents strict?
Yeah, so actually Becky and I, interestingly enough, had a conversation about this the other day. So we were talking about discipline, and the way discipline was handled in my household was mom and dad both did this level of discipline, And then once it got to this level, then it was dad, right? So, and dad was never abusive. Dad was, I mean, we had physical discipline, but it was never lost temper. It was never over the top. It was always, this is what happened. This is the punishment. This is how it's going to handle. I never got a belt, which I'm guaranteeing a lot of you guys got a belt at some point or another.
Oh, yeah.
Not the well-behaved ones, but Diana especially. No. But she asked, she said, did your dad ever get tired of being the disciplinarian? And because I had just disciplined her, I had stepped in to like, rah, you know, be the 6'3", big, imposing human that I am. And I said, no, because dad was, he only did that. He only put that hat on when he had to put that hat on. Right? That wasn't his go-to. He was fun. We did a lot of activities, a lot of fun stuff together. He was our church youth group leader for junior high with Abby, and then junior class with me. So we did a lot of really fun, cool stuff. And Dad tried to be as active with us as his job would allow. But he only put that discipline hat on when he had to, and then, like I said, it was always measured when he did it. So it was never, I got home at the end of the day and I'm gonna kick you in the cat. It was never any of that sort of stuff. It was, you did this, you had this infraction, this is the punishment. So it was very set. And I always admired that about him, because I think, like, growing up, I didn't see my father a lot because he was just working all the time. So when I think we tend to forget, or at least I tend to forget, that the cattle market in Iowa used to be, or in this area used to be, so much bigger than it is now. And so, the time I spent with Dad as a kid was working. So he would go, all right, I got a call, I got to go calving, let's go. And then I would, do my best to carry the bags and everything else until I, eventually got big enough to properly help. But even those times were good times. Like, I always enjoyed going out and working with them. One of my fondest memories, we'd be coming back late at night, and WHO used to have this program. It was the old radio theater, right? And so we'd be driving through the darkness on these backcountry roads in northern Missouri, just waiting to turn a corner and find a terrible bridge that's out or something, listening to these. But I felt safe with my dad driving at night doing that, right? And so it's like one of those kind of nice memories from back in the day. But, sorry, I'm not sure what the original question was, but I
Were they strict?
wormed around. Yeah. Yes, they were. I would say they were strict in the sense, not like authoritarian or totalitarian, but they were strict in the sense they had expectations, they had standards, and they wanted to see me succeed. And because I'm a kid, and no offense to kids, but they're not very well formed, right? They don't have the best thinking power, or they can't think long-term goals or things like that. Carter, you think fantastically for a 10-year-old, but you're still a 10-year-old, right? And so what I wanted as a kid was not always what was best for me, right? And so they had standards that I didn't always like, and that I would buck sometimes or try to, but they would try to hold me to those standards because they wanted to set me up for success in the future. And if I don't learn how to be a successful kid, I'm generally not going to be a successful adult, right? And so they weren't overly strict. They just had good standards for me, right? Expectations and stuff like that.
Can you talk a little bit about the mentors in your life and how you think they've influenced you and who they were?
Well, of course, your first one is your parents, right? Dad, for me, just because I'm a man, he's a man, right? It's easier to emulate that. And I think having him really rubbed off me in the sense that work ethic, right? That man's always worked out. Whether it's working at the vet clinic, pulling thistles, out at Bloomington, doing something. And generally, I don't have quite his work ethic, right? I take after my mom, where I also understand that you got to rest sometimes, and it's okay to do that. But whether it was in the Army or in college or even at my job now, his way of getting through things, his way of getting through things was just to get through them, right? How do you eat an elephant one spoonful at a time, right? There's a task you have to do it. And I think my dad put in my mind that there are things you have to do. Not necessarily like we all have the same things, but like your job asks you to do something. Not necessarily that you have to do what your job says, because maybe your job's asking you to do something illegal or unfair, or, you know, whatever the case may be. But when you have duties and obligations, you have to do them, regardless. Like, it sucks that you're gonna have to go through whatever to do it, but you have to do it, right? I remember talking about some of my experience in the Army with some friends, and like, how did you do that? I didn't have a choice. I had to do it. It was my job, it was my obligation, it was my duty. And so I had to do it, right? And so having that work ethic and that sense of like, there's things that are gonna be really terrible and you're not gonna like doing them, but you're gonna have to do them because that's part of life. That helped me out quite a bit. I think my mother, some of her best qualities I got, not near to the level that she has, is I can generally remain relatively calm, which is nice. My dad is much more of a, you know, up and down emotional person, which I can see that in my grandmother and then him, and I'm like, I hope I'm not quite as emotional, but my mom is very steady, calming influence. I remember as an example, one time I was driving back up to Ames, and I was moving out. So I had come down, gotten Dad's truck, not the vet truck, but the farm truck, and a trailer, because I was gonna go bring it up, load stuff up, bring it back home. And as I had just gotten out of Des Moines on that north corridor of I-35 between Ames and Des Moines, and all of a sudden I hear boom, and I pull over, and I get out, I leave the truck running, because I'm thinking it sounded like, and it felt like the hitch had just come loose. And knowing our equipment, it's possible, right? We had to keep her chain, so we'd be all right. Someday I hope to be the first person in my family to own a fully licensed, registered, and with the lights working trailer. It's a lofty goal. Someday I'll get there. But anyway, I get out, and I look back, I'm like, oh, it's still hooked up. But I can't really see the lights. I didn't have my cell phone was dead or something, so I couldn't turn the flashlight on. So I go back to get in the truck and get a flashlight out. And as I climbed through the truck, I bumped the automatic locks. And so the truck's running, locks are shut, and oh no, my phone was not dead. It just didn't have a flashlight. It was maybe a flip phone, or I don't know.
Yeah, it probably wasn't a flashlight.
And so I'm able to call though. So I call Mom and Dad, because they've got AAA on the truck. And I called Dad, hey, so here's what happened. I'm on the side of the road, truck's running, it's got about a full tank of gas, doors are locked. Do you guys have any way to look up a mechanic near me, or get me a number or something, or something? He's like, what, what's going on? Ah! Hand the phone to Mom, Mom gets the phone, what happened? Okay, this is what happened. Okay, I'll call such, help's on the way, bye. You know, and so that's that calm, and maybe that's part of being an ER nurse too, you know. But that calmness and the ability to remain calm in the face of a crisis, I'm not as good as her, but I think I have some of that, right? Also being able to let things roll off your back. Right? Don't get me wrong, I have the ability to hold a vendetta just like anybody else, right? But generally, you try to let things roll off your back, because in the end, how much does one insult or one misspeak matter, right? And so trying to let things, for the most part, everyone has their flare-ups, everyone has their temper, trying not to let things affect that terribly. So that's not throwing you off your game and you're not reacting in some way you don't. And then if you do, and you are in the wrong, trying to be gracious about it after the fact and say, hey, I was wrong. And especially like when you're talking to kids or students or stuff like that, like I always try to do that with my students. If I'm wrong about something, like the other day I apologized to a student because I gave them the wrong definition. I went home and I was like, I don't feel right about that. Let me look this up. And then the next day I went out, I was like, hey, I talked to Becky and she set me straight, as per usual. And I went back into school and I apologized. In front of the class, I said, hey, I was wrong. She was right. She had the definition correct. I just wanted to let you know I was wrong, just to make sure you guys all know what the definition is, and also to point out that like we're all wrong every once in a while. Even if you're in a position of authority, you're going to be wrong at points, and that's okay. Learn from your mistake and move on, right? So, yeah.
Why social sciences?
I really like history. So if you'd asked eighth grade me, I was going to be a lawyer and then a senator, right? And then I got into the Army and I was like, man, government's corrupt and everything. except for me, right? So, and then by the time I got to college, so I did a history with a poli-sci minor, and then of course the teaching endorsement. And I could have still gone to law school if I had wanted to, but at that point I was ready to get into a career, into settling, right? And not meaning settling, but like getting settled down. I remember in Boy Scouts, which I think was very formative to my youth and actually helped me out quite a bit and kept me out of trouble. But I remember being one of the senior Boy Scouts and teaching kids how to tie knots and how to do, you know, just various things in Boy Scout related, how to do land navigation, all that sort of stuff. And then I did the same thing as an NCO in the Army. I was a staff sergeant when I got out. And so I would have been a squad leader, so I was in charge of a 9-man squad. And then every once in a while I have to take over platoon when, you know, platoon sergeant's gone. But I was always teaching people, and I enjoyed that, right? I felt like I was good at it, I could help people with it, and I enjoyed it. And then the social sciences, back to your original question, history is a story, and I enjoy telling stories, and I enjoy learning stories and hearing stories, and then trying to dig through the story to figure out what the meaning of the story is, and how this story relates to this story, and how we could have learned from this story and not done this story, right? You know, and if you don't know who you were, then you don't know who you are, right? And so that was just really interesting to me. I also had my senior year, I had a really good social studies teacher. He came in for a former teacher and replaced him. And the way he taught the class, and granted I was a senior, so it wasn't like, you know, freshman U.S. history or something like that, but the way he taught the class was very devil's advocate. And it said it didn't matter what you said, he would argue with you. You know, you could be coming from the right or the left or the center or top, bottom, whatever. And he would argue with you to make you critically think about what you're thinking about, right? Why do you believe what you believe? Right? Are you just repeating what somebody else has told you, or have you thought critically about how this affects you and that sort of stuff? And so, not teaching people what to think, but how to think, I think is incredibly important. I feel like I can do that, and I can argue about any side, for the most part, right? You know, I can argue about any side to get people to think critically about it, and so that interested me in the social sciences. So, and you know, it's not hard science, so it's not a hard science, you know. So.
Why did you choose to come back to Lamoni?
Family. My family's here, right? And I had moved once a year for about 11 years in a row. So from when I was 18 to when I graduated college and finally came back here, I had moved about once a year. And 2 of those years were living out of a rucksack, you know, so not like I moved well or something, you know. But I was tired of the nomadic lifestyle, and I was ready to settle down, get into a career, and get to my adult life, you know. And Lamoni has been, I enjoyed growing up in Lamoni. I would like my kids to grow up and attend Lamoni Community Schools, you know, and to be surrounded by family. I was surrounded by family. Like Becky and I talk about this whenever we have a family gathering, one of my family gatherings. Because as the Jones, who have been adopted by the Silvers for Thanksgiving, can attest to, it's just it would be my dad's immediate family that attends this, but it's still, you know, when we have everybody, 40 plus people. We would go out to Bloomington and do it in the fellowship hall, or this year we did it out at the golf course because they'd already had somebody in fellowship hall. But I grew up with a large family and having family around, and that's such a wonderful thing to me because when you're down, who's going to pick you up? Your family. You know, when you know, you're hitting rock bottom and everybody else is giving up on you, hopefully you have a family that's going to be right there to help you out. And then just to talk about the savings in childcare. Oh my goodness. But I mean, in all honesty though, I do remember being closer with my grandma Smith because she lived up in my grandpa Smith because they lived in Leon. And I saw them pretty regularly. And don't get me wrong, I love my grandma and grandpa Silver, but they lived in Boone. And that's only 2 hours, but that's still 2 hours away. So we'd only see them every once in a while. And so I would like my kids to be able to enjoy their grandparents. I would like their grandparents to be able to enjoy them. Maybe more often so that me and my wife can go hang out on our own, no, and they've been, all of our family here, whether we're talking about Diana or Jim or Pat or anybody in my family, have been just a huge blessing that have eased what burden being a parent is. And not like fully obviously, but have definitely taken a lot off our plate and made it so much better, nicer, and just an enjoyable experience.
What about your city council work?
Said government was all corrupt.
I followed up with, except for me. Sorry, Jordan. Well, he convinced me to run. Jordan did. How long ago was that? 10, 12 years ago. And there was an opening in the council. Who was it? Ruth Smith and Janelle Anders were stepping down, if I remember right, or was Janelle Mayer at that time? Okay, and they were stepping down, so there was an opening on the council, and he had some things he was interested in doing that I thought were going to help grow the community, especially with attention to like the airport and stuff. I thought, I'm pretty level-headed guy, maybe I can help with things, and then it just kind of stuck, for better or for worse. I enjoy it. I honestly don't feel as though I can put as much time into it as I feel like I should, but I also wonder if part of that's me just feeling like I need to do more, you know what I mean? If that's holding myself to an unacceptable or an unreachable standard, yeah. So
You're young enough, you can get in a lot of years.
that's true. I think we talked about, because Roger and Tony Crandall and Roger Potts were of course both on it when we got on there. I thought, is that going to be us in 60 years? We'll age more gracefully.
Would you introduce Jordan and talk a little bit about your relationship?
That's Jordan. Jordan Olmsted, if you guys don't know him.
Yeah.
He's all right.
We'd like to welcome you, Jordan, to our congregation today. Thank you for coming.
Glad to be here.
We actually grew up together. We didn't really hang out until I became a freshman, I think, is when we started hanging out, which is actually one of the most wonderful things. Like, it was very kind of Jordan and Mark Boswell and his friend group to allow, pesky little me, freshman me, to hang out with them. And it was actually wonderful for me. It actually benefited me a lot more than it benefited him. My friends, the people who I generally hung out with up till 8th grade, started getting into a lot of things that I didn't want to get into. And that because my parents had expectations and standards and held me accountable, I didn't really get into much. But I started hanging out with them because they weren't doing that, right? So my friends were off hanging out on a dirt road, doing their thing. I was hanging out with Jordan in his garage, working on, I was not working on, watching him work on a square body Chevy. And that's a much better thing for a young man to be doing on a Saturday night than the other, right? And so Jordan and his friend group kind of adopted me under their wing, and then, we've kind of been friends since, I guess. I've been dragging him down, riding his coattails since, so that's him. So.
And then you went.
Oh, sorry. One addition, sorry. Just to preface this real quick, because I got to get a dig in. So somebody had asked me earlier about my decision or discussing, I think it used to, ask me about discussing with my friends joining the Army or my parents, stuff like that. My mom, she knew I was going to do it. She wasn't overly happy about it. And as Dr. Magley can point out, her hair grayed up quite a bit over the course of my military service. And I remember coming back on mid-tour leave and that first deployment and just being like, ooh, this is stressful for you. I thought it was stressful for me. It's not near stressful for me as it is for you. And I think any parent, spouse, sibling, or anything like that can attest to that. And real quick, we always talk, you were talking about we need to think about the soldiers and the sailors and all those people, but like there's a lot of people that are support network back home that are worried, that are sick, that are sending support and aid, and we don't think about them a lot, but they're going through a lot of the same stuff that, I mean, they're not getting shot at or anything, but you know, they're going through the same emotional problems and the worries and everything else that a soldier or anybody else is going through. And so I say we can't forget them, because they're all playing their part too. If my parents hadn't been sending me stuff, my sisters hadn't supported me, my life would have been a lot worse in the military, right? They carried me through a lot of that stuff with their support and their help. But in discussing with my father, so the recruiter took, I had already said, I'm going to sign, I'm going to join, my plan is to go infantry. And so went into my dad to get him to sign the paperwork, because I did the delayed entry program. So I enlisted when I was 17, did like once a month, I'd go up to the recruiter station, we do a little bit of training. And then when I, graduated high school, then 3 days later, I was on a plane to Fort Benning going, oh my goodness, what did I just do? Which I think we all have that existential crisis at that moment, especially when you're the only one, first time flying on a plane, like a proper plane, and flying by yourself from Des Moines to Atlanta, and you're just like, but in discussing with my father, and everyone does their part, just to be clear, he said, what are you joining the Army for, you idiot? What do you mean? He goes, you need to join the Air Force. They get good food, they get good housing, they don't have to do all the stuff you'll have to do. And I said, you are infantry, I'm infantry. And so I, of course, had to prove my manhood and be infantry. And I'm glad I did, but because then even I was 11 Bravo, which is like light infantry, frontline infantry. My dad was 11 Charlie, which is the mortarman, lobbing stuff from behind, which, they're important. But they're not real infantry. So he just chuck. But anyway, there was a little trepidation, right? I didn't grow up in this congregation. As a kid, when I would come here, it seemed very formal and sit down and like rigid. Whereas Bloomington, there were a lot more kids, so it was, a lot more active. It felt like. And so coming in, it was, a little trepidation. Like the other day when I did, or I guess here, where I was doing the good news announcements, I failed you once, Paul, I'm sorry. But I said that I didn't know anybody's name, or not many of your guys' names, and I'm sorry for that. I've been cloistered upstairs. But so there was that fear of the unknown, right? Anytime you go into a new situation, there's a little anxiety, a little trepidation. But you guys are fantastic. You welcomed me in. You did what a congregation's supposed to do. You brought me in. You were kind, open, and gracious. Like when I do the dumb things that I do, you were it's just right. So you guys have been wonderful, and I've enjoyed being a part of this congregation.
Yeah, you don't realize you're one of the kids.
Yes, I feel like that. At
They're
times,
the
right?
kids, but yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we've enjoyed having you here.
I appreciate that. Thank
You're
you.
you're a construction man too.
Kind of, yeah. Just a little bit enough to be dangerous, but I try not to do too much of it.
I've been watching after you.
Appreciate it.
Okay, you had an out-processing physical. Any PTSD or anything?
No, not that I can think of. And like, I mean, you're always going to carry something with you, right? So if I smell incense, and that's not to say don't burn incense around me, or son, you do you. But if I smell incense, it automatically just brings me right back to Iraq. Like, and not like I'm going to go into this violent rage or anything. It's just like, oh yeah, duh. Because every house in Iraq, they burned incense. And so it was just, that was the smell. And so it's, but it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't trigger anything real negative. It's just, it puts you on alert for a second, and then you're like, oh yeah. Carry on. And so I'm very fortunate in the fact that I don't think I carry a lot of, mental scars from that or anything. I never got shot. We went through 9 trucks. My truck, we went through 9 between my 2 deployments. I was the 2nd and 3rd MRAP to be disabled in Iraq by an IED.
If you guys understand how big an MRAP is, it is a monster-looking truck.
About 17 foot tall, 24 foot long.
And it looks like a semi.
Yep.
And the bottom of it has a V on it.
It's a V
So
shape.
when the explosion happens, it diverts the
And
power of it away from you.
I say that saved my life twice in a row, which is fantastic.
Good
But-
gosh.
So you were disabled?
Not me, the vehicles.
Oh, the.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I was gonna say, you look.
I mean, some people have called me that, but.
You know, you bring up a question for me. We watch movies about what it's like to be in war, etc. How do you not be frightened every day? When you're over there and you've got a weapon and you know the enemy's not far away, I just don't get how young men from this country go over there and deal with that.
Well, I think it's three things. One, you got your buddy to your left and your right, right? And so if you think about it, and it sounds like a cliche, but you sit there and you go, oh, you know, we're fighting for the mission, God and country, da da. Right? When I'm overseas, I'm not thinking about any of that. I'm thinking about, you know, the mission we're on, but it's the dude to my left and the dude to my right. Those are the people that I'm concerned about, right? And I know they've got my back, and we've been training together for, you know, a year plus at this point. So we're a really tightly bonded unit. And so that puts that fear further away, right? It's not like it's not there, but you can overcome. And I think also, generally people who serve the military, they, like if you don't have the ability to overcome fear, you should not join the military, right? If you cannot show courage in the face of fear, which, right, courage is not the absence of fear, it's overcoming that fear, right? Fear is a good thing, it's a natural thing, right? Keeps us from jumping off the cliff, you know, that kind of stuff. But in certain circumstances, you have to overcome that fear, and I think people who join the military generally have an ability to do that. If you can't, and that's not saying that only people in the military can, but like, I think if you can't do that, then you're getting the wrong job. And then the third is, I don't know if you remember what it was like to be 21, but I was pretty stupid. And I thought that I could do anything, right? I was Superman. And so, especially if you give me an M4 or a 240 Bravo and body armor, a couple grenades, I could get anything done, right?
Invincible.
I am invincible, yes.
Explain a Bravo and a whatever.
Oh, sorry. An M4 is like an M16, except for it's carbine version, collapsible stock, shorter barrel. And an M240 Bravo would be it's a machine gun. It's the light infantry heavy machine gun that replaced the M60, if you guys ever heard of an M60, the Vietnam machine gun. And so when I first got in, because I was a larger statured human, I was a gunner. So I got the 240, which yay for me. That's always fun to walk through the underbrush with it in Fort Campbell.
Good shoulders.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you find that being a father changes your risk-taking?
Oh yeah, yeah. So I have a motorcycle. I don't know if anybody, some of you probably know that, some of you probably don't. Since becoming a father, so since Becky, Marley, and Parker have moved in, and then we added Daniel, I have not ridden that motorcycle near as much, right? And when I do ride, it's like around the block a time or two. And usually it's like, all right, Marley, hop on, we're gonna go to the school, I'm gonna drop you off, and I'm gonna drive home, we get Parker, drop you off, drive back, park the motorcycle, and then I'm gonna go in, right? Or it's we're gonna drive around town at 5 miles an hour, you know, going around the block. So part of that's probably because I don't have time anymore for anything, you know, you're running quite a bit. Part of that's wising up, you know, like as you get older you realize like, hey, maybe that risk's not gonna pay off like I think it should, or I shouldn't take that risk. And then yeah, the other is consideration of like, well, if I die, what's gonna happen? You know, Becky will be a wreck. There'll be wailing and gnashing of teeth, hairless from pulling her hair out, right? Inconsolable, as she should be, as she should be.
But
What about your
have
father?
anything to do with your dad?
Oh, no, not necessarily. He was dumb. He was, I mean, sorry.
That young.
I shouldn't insult,
He said dumb.
I shouldn't insult my father in this sense, but I told him I was going to get interviewed today, and one of the questions was heroes, and I would say my dad is one of my heroes, but I also did tell him on the phone, I said, you might not want to show up because you might get your feelings hurt. if they asked that question. He chuckled, of course, you know.
Really stored up.
Yeah, yeah. So
Twice.
twice. So my first deployment, or no, my second deployment was when he wrecked in Yellowstone. That first time where he pretty much scalped himself.
Right.
And I remember we were getting notes at the end. So the end of the day, the platoon, after the captain and the first sergeant had their meeting, the lieutenant and the platoon sergeant go down to the squad leaders. They tell them, all right, these are the missions for tomorrow. This is what we're looking out for. These are the, you know, operational security risks. Blah, blah, blah. They go through everything, and then we go disseminate that information to our soldiers. And so they held me back from this meeting, like, hey, Silver, you got to stay. We got to talk to you about something. All right, what's up? He goes, your dad was in a really bad motorcycle accident. I was like, ah, okay. Is he okay? He goes, well, he's stable. Do you want to go home on leave? And I said no, because the rule was for everybody else, if it's not a family member that's dying, you don't go. You can't go. They wouldn't let you in if it's a non-immediate family member, so it's not sibling, parent, or child, or, you know, spouse, you don't get to go on emergency leave during deployment. And so they offered me, I said no, because a standard is a standard is a standard, right? If it's good enough for them, it's good enough for me. If it's not good enough for them, it's not good enough for me. But I said, all right, so what happens? Like, well, he was riding through Yellowstone, I guess, what the Red Cross message says, and he wrecked, but they've got him stabilized at this place. And I said, yeah, he's an idiot. And they go, what do you mean? I go, well, he just got out of his chemo treatment. He can't feel his hands. He can't feel his feet. He's because of the chemo, pre-diabetic, right? He's got all these things that should make him not ride a motorcycle. You have to be a fit human being to ride a motorcycle, and you have to be on alert the entire, I can't remember who it was talking about, they saw me riding by and they're like, you didn't even wave. And I said, because I had seen you, I saw you weren't moving, so I took my focus off of you because everything on this road is trying to kill me. That's my assumption when I'm riding a motorcycle. Everyone on the road is trying to kill me on my motorcycle. And so you have to be defensive when driving a motorcycle. My dad did not make good decisions. And then the next time he was just going too fast, got off in the gravel and about lost his leg because of it, right? And so that's why I putt around, right? I'm not out there trying to break land speed records or anything. I did that when I was 18, and thank God nothing happened there, right? But anyway, so I take probably less risks.
Okay, well, thanks a lot.
Hey, I will tell you. Gee, I just looked over and she smiled at me, and so it just popped in my mind. The best risk I ever took was asking a girl out. She said yes. So,
Good work.
yes.
Good work.